The little black girl begged the biker, saying a torn scarf of her mom was found near a forbidden trail. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. A little girl, barely 8 years old, ran through the woods with nothing but her tear-streaked face and a tattered scarf clutched in her small hands. She was barefoot, the rough ground beneath her feet only adding to the distress in her eyes. She stumbled as she ran, but there was no time to stop. She had to find help. Her mother needed her. Her breath came in ragged sobs as she reached the edge of the forest, where the distant sound of roaring engines echoed through the trees. The motorcycle club, the Iron Riders, were gathered at their usual spot near the carnival, winding down after a long day of charity work. They were cleaning up, talking amongst themselves, when the little girl appeared from the shadows, her feet bleeding and her body shaking from fear. Without a word, she rushed towards the booth where the bikers were gathered. The men, rugged and rough around the edges, turned in surprise as the child approached. Her eyes were wide with panic, and in her hand, she held a torn scarf, the fabric still stained with dirt and something darker. She stumbled up to the closest biker, Jack Storm Morrison, the leader of the group. "Please, you have to help me," she cried, her voice barely audible over the hum of the motorcycles. "My mom, she's in trouble. They took her. She was last seen near a forbidden trail. Please, help me." Jack, a man hardened by years of life on the road, looked down at the girl. His eyes softened, his heart heavy with an emotion he rarely let himself feel. He took the scarf from her trembling hands and inspected it. It was unmistakable. He had seen that fabric before, years ago, on a woman he once knew. He had a sinking feeling in his gut, one that told him this was no ordinary request. "Where is she?" Jack asked, his voice firm but gentle. "Where did they take her?" The little girl, still shaking, pointed in the direction of the dark woods beyond the carnival. "Over there, near the forbidden trail," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor in the wind. "They said she would never leave." Jack nodded, a silent understanding passing between him and his crew. This wasn't just about a lost woman. It was about something far more sinister. He turned to his men, his voice steady as he issued orders. "Get the bikes ready. We're going after her." The bikers, all with years of experience in facing down danger, exchanged looks. They knew this trail. It was said to be cursed. No one went near it. But they had a code. You didn't leave a family member behind. "Let's ride," Jack said, his voice low but commanding. The engines roared to life as the Iron Riders formed a line, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey would not be easy, and it would be dangerous. But Jack had made a promise years ago, one that he intended to keep. The riders sped off into the night, their bikes cutting through the dark, a wall of steel and leather charging toward an uncertain fate. As they approached the edge of the woods, the little girl's words echoed in Jack's mind. They said she would never leave. What awaited them at the forbidden trail was unknown, but one thing was certain: no one would stop them from bringing her home. As the Iron Riders continued to race down the darkened road, the roar of their engines cutting through the night, Jack kept his focus on the road ahead. The weight of the promise he had made to the little girl's father, Rick, echoed in his mind. 5 years ago, when Rick had left the club to start a new life, Jack had sworn to watch over his family. Now, with his daughter in danger, that promise was being put to the test in ways Jack could never have imagined. The road stretched ahead of them, and the bikes moved in perfect formation, their headlights piercing the night like a pack of wolves on a hunt. The forest surrounding them was thick and dense, and the trees seemed to lean in as if watching their every move. Jack's grip tightened on his handlebars. The smell of damp earth and pine filled the air, mingling with the scent of gasoline and leather. He could hear the soft murmur of voices over the radio. "This doesn't feel right," Vince said, his voice a low growl. "I've been here before, and I know this place. It's bad news." Jack didn't reply at first, his eyes scanning the road ahead. The club had known about the forbidden trail, the place where people said strange things happened, where disappearances were whispered about in the local towns. Jack had never believed the stories, but tonight, they seemed to have taken on a new weight. "We're too far in now," Jack finally said. "We go forward, no turning back." The bikes roared louder as they neared the end of the trail. Jack could feel the temperature dropping, the air growing colder. It wasn't just the chill of the night. It was the sense that something was waiting for them, something dangerous. The little girl's cries echoed in his mind. "They took my brother. They took my mom." He had to keep pushing forward. They had no other choice. The pack continued to move, now deep into the heart of the woods. Trees loomed like silent sentinels on either side. The road grew rougher, and soon they were riding through a narrow, rocky path, the sound of crunching gravel beneath their tires. They were getting closer to the destination. Jack's heart raced, not just with the adrenaline of the chase, but with a growing sense of dread. There was something off about this place, something that didn't sit right. He glanced at the other riders. Bear, the massive biker with the scars, was leading the charge, his eyes fixed ahead. Behind him, Diesel kept close, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The rest of the crew followed in a tight formation, their faces hard and focused. As they approached the clearing, Jack could see a faint light in the distance. A building, maybe. It was barely visible through the trees, and the closer they got, the more unsettling it became. The building was old, crumbling, with boarded-up windows and a sagging porch. The kind of place no one in their right mind would approach. Jack slowed his bike, and the others followed suit. The engines cut off one by one, leaving an eerie silence in the air. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees was the only thing they could hear. Jack's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the area. This was it. This was where the girl had said her mother had been taken. He felt a chill run down his spine. "Let's split up," Jack said, his voice low but steady. "We cover all sides. Stay sharp. No one gets separated." The bikers moved silently, positioning themselves around the house. Every step they took was calculated, every movement deliberate. Jack approached the porch, his boots crunching softly on the dry leaves. He motioned for Diesel to check the back. The rest of the crew moved to cover the other sides. As Jack reached the front door, he hesitated for just a moment. There was something about this house, this place, that felt wrong. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, it was dark and musty. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of something rotten lingered. Jack's heart beat faster. He stepped inside, his boots making no sound on the creaky floorboards. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, and that's when he saw it, something glinting in the corner of the room. It was a pair of eyes staring back at him. The girl's mother. She was sitting in a corner, huddled against the wall, her face pale and drawn. Her clothes were torn, her hair matted to her head. Jack's stomach turned. "It's going to be okay," Jack said softly as he approached her. "We're here to help you." She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand," she whispered hoarsely. "They'll never let me go. They'll never let me leave." Jack knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. He could feel the trembling in her fingers, the fear radiating off her. He looked at the others, motioning for them to keep watch. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low. She swallowed hard before speaking. "The Serpents," she said, her voice barely audible. "They're after me, after us." Jack's heart sank. The Serpents were a gang known for their brutality. They didn't leave survivors. "We need to get you out of here," Jack said, his voice firm. "Now." But just as he stood, a sound from behind him made him freeze. The door slammed shut with a deafening thud. Jack spun around, his hand reaching for his gun. The Serpents had found them. The fight was just beginning. The door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls, and Jack's hand flew to his gun, ready to defend himself. The other bikers rushed to secure their positions, but it was already too late. From the shadows, figures emerged, dark, intimidating, and wearing the unmistakable colors of the Serpents. The gang had found them. Jack's heart raced, but his expression remained calm. He could feel the weight of the moment, the responsibility of the promise he had made to Rick. He wasn't about to let this group of thugs take what was rightfully theirs. Jack motioned for the others to hold back. "Stay quiet. Let's not give them a reason to start anything," he whispered into his radio. But it was clear, the Serpents had no intention of waiting. The leader of the gang stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. His jacket, covered in patches and symbols of violence, swayed as he moved. "I didn't think we'd see you here, Jack," the man said, his voice dripping with malice. "What brings you to this part of town? You're not welcome." Jack stood tall, unfazed. "I'm here to make sure that little girl and her mother get home safely. You don't want to start a fight you can't finish." The serpent leader smirked, taking a step closer. "You think I'm scared of you? You're nothing but a bunch of rebels with no cause." He waved his hand dismissively at the bikers. "And that girl? She's just collateral damage." At that, something inside Jack snapped. He could hear the echo of the little girl's voice in his head. Asterisk, they took my mom. Asterisk, there was no turning back now. "You're going to regret that," Jack said, his voice low but full of fire. He motioned to Diesel and Bear, signaling them to get ready. Without another word, the serpents lunged forward, but before they could make a move, Jack was already on the offensive. He was faster, sharper. The first serpent came at him with a knife, but Jack dodged it effortlessly, grabbing his wrist and twisting it until the blade fell to the ground. With a swift move, Jack kicked the man's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. The bikers were now in full motion, fighting back against the gang. The sounds of fists colliding with flesh, boots thudding against the ground, and the roar of engines created a chaotic symphony. But Jack's focus remained on the leader. He spotted him moving towards the mother, a cold look in his eyes. The leader's intention was clear. He was going to finish what he had started. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. He could see the leader's every move, and he knew exactly what to do. With lightning speed, Jack tackled the man to the ground, knocking the wind out of him. He pinned him down with his knee and grabbed the man's throat, squeezing just enough to keep him still. "Not today," Jack said through gritted teeth. The leader struggled beneath him, but Jack's grip tightened. He had made a promise, and nothing was going to break that. The other bikers were finishing up with the rest of the serpents. Diesel, Bear, and the others were handling the remaining gang members with ease, their years of training and loyalty to the club making them a force to be reckoned with. As the last of the serpents were subdued, Jack looked around at his crew. "Get them out of here," Jack ordered, nodding to the fallen gang members. "Make sure they're not a threat anymore." Diesel and the others immediately got to work, securing the serpents and making sure they wouldn't come back. Jack stood up, his hand still firmly around the leader's neck. "I told you not to mess with this family," Jack said, his voice cold. The leader's face turned purple from lack of air, but Jack loosened his grip just enough for him to speak. "You think this is over?" The leader spat, his voice raspy. Jack bent down, bringing his face close to the leader's. "This is over when I say it is," Jack replied, his voice laced with fury. He stood up and nodded to the other bikers. "We've done what we came here to do. Let's get them out of here." As the bikers loaded the mother and her 2 children onto their bikes, Jack glanced at the surrounding area. The night had grown eerily quiet, the sounds of the fight fading into the distance. He could feel the tension slowly draining from his body, but his resolve remained firm. This was just one battle in a much larger war. As they made their way out of the house, Jack couldn't help but think of Rick, of the promise he had made, and of the lives they had saved tonight. They would continue to protect those who needed it most, no matter the cost. With the mother and her children now safe, Jack knew that their journey wasn't over. The serpents would come back, but so would the Iron Riders. And when they did, they would be ready. The ride back was quiet, the hum of the motorcycles the only sound breaking the silence of the dark night. Jack's mind raced as he glanced at the mother, who sat quietly behind him on his bike. Her hands were wrapped tightly around his waist, but he could feel her tremble with fear. Her 2 children were safe, nestled behind their respective riders, but the terror she had endured tonight was far from over. The Iron Riders had rescued her from the clutches of the serpents, but Jack knew this was only the beginning. As they reached the outskirts of the forest, the fog began to lift, and the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The club rode in perfect formation, a tight-knit unit ready for whatever came next. Jack's heart was heavy with a familiar weight, the weight of responsibility. The promise he made to Rick, to keep his family safe, wasn't over yet. The serpents would come for them again, no doubt. And next time, they wouldn't be so lucky. Jack glanced at the rearview mirror, his eyes landing on the little girl. She was still holding her torn scarf, clutching it like it was a lifeline. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear, but there was something else there too, a glimmer of hope. She had seen the strength of the Iron Riders tonight, and she knew they wouldn't back down. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking his thoughts. He reached for it and saw a message from Vince, the club's second-in-command. "We've got trouble," the message read. "The Serpents are regrouping. They know we're onto them." Jack cursed under his breath. It wasn't a surprise. The Serpents were ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. But what Jack didn't expect was the second message that came through. "There's more," it read. "The cops are in on it. Officer Donovan's been paid off." Jack's blood ran cold. Officer Donovan, the man who had been a trusted member of the community, the same man who had been Maya's stepfather. Jack's fists tightened around the handlebars. This was bigger than just a gang war. This was about corruption at the highest levels. Jack's mind raced. The bikers had been prepared to face the Serpents, but the cops? They had no way of knowing how deep the betrayal ran. "We need to get to Rick," Jack said, his voice tight with urgency. "The cops can't be trusted anymore. We need to make sure his family is safe." He pushed the throttle, signaling the others to follow. The Iron Riders sped up, the engines roaring louder as they made their way toward Rick's house. As they neared, Jack could see the lights of the house in the distance. He could also see the shadows of two figures standing outside, talking in low voices. Jack's instincts kicked in. "Stay back," he ordered over the radio. "We don't know who those people are." The club slowed, pulling off the road and hiding behind the trees. Jack's eyes narrowed as he watched the figures. One of them was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard. The other was shorter, but just as imposing. Both men wore dark jackets, and Jack recognized the symbol on the back of their vests, the Serpents. The two men turned and walked toward the house. Jack felt his heart race. They had to act quickly. "We need to move now," Jack said. "They're here for Rick's family. We can't let them take anyone else." The bikers revved their engines and charged toward the house, their speed increasing as they approached. Jack led the way, his bike roaring like a beast ready to strike. As they neared the driveway, Jack saw a flash of movement. A figure darted from the house, running toward the woods. "There!" Jack shouted. After him. The bikers split into two groups, with half following Jack as he raced after the figure. The other half stayed behind to protect the house. Jack pushed his bike faster, the engine roaring as he chased the man through the woods. The trees blurred past him, and he could hear the crunch of leaves and twigs under his tires. The man ahead of him was fast, but Jack was faster. He had the advantage. Jack closed the gap quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure glanced over his shoulder, realizing he was being chased. He made a sharp turn to the left, trying to throw Jack off his trail. But Jack wasn't fooled. He followed the man's movements, anticipating his next move. With one swift motion, Jack leaned into the turn, cutting off the man's escape route. The figure stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide with fear. Jack's bike screeched to a halt just inches from him. "You've nowhere to run," Jack said, his voice cold and calm. The man's breath quickened, and he looked around frantically for a way out. Jack dismounted from his bike, his boots crunching on the forest floor as he approached the man. "Who sent you?" Jack demanded. The man shook his head, his lips trembling. "I'm not telling you anything." Jack stepped forward, his gaze never leaving the man's eyes. He had no time for games. "You're going to talk," Jack said, "or I'll make you." The man's defiance faltered. He glanced nervously toward the road. Jack's eyes narrowed. The man was scared, but he wasn't about to give up easily. "You don't know who you're dealing with," the man spat. "The Serpents will come for you." Jack smirked. "I'm not afraid of the Serpents," he said. "But you should be." He grabbed the man by the collar, lifting him off the ground. "Now tell me what you know." The man's face paled as he struggled in Jack's grip. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and shaky. "It's not just the Serpents," he whispered. "It's bigger than that. The whole town's on their side." Jack's grip tightened. This was far from over. They were up against more than just a gang. They were up against a network of corruption that ran deeper than he could ever have imagined. The man's words echoed in Jack's ears as he tightened his grip on him, not caring that the man's face was turning red from the lack of air. The whole town was on their side. Jack felt a rush of anger rise in his chest. He had known things were bad, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. He released the man, watching him crumple to the ground in a heap. "What do you mean?" Jack asked, his voice low and menacing. The man wheezed, trying to catch his breath, but his eyes darted around, clearly weighing whether to speak or not. Jack's patience was thin. Speak, he ordered. The serpents have eyes everywhere, the man said, his voice shaky but urgent. They've infiltrated the local government, the police, even some of the businesses. It's all connected. You think it's just about the gang? It's not. It's about control. Jack's mind raced. This was far more dangerous than a simple gang war. This was a systemic problem, one that went to the very core of the town. And now, with the cops involved, it was personal. Who else is involved? Jack demanded. The man swallowed hard. I don't know everything. But there's one person who's behind all of it. Donovan. He's the one who's been pulling the strings. Jack's stomach twisted. Officer Donovan, the man who had been in charge of Maya's case, the man who had been her stepfather. It all made sense now. Jack had always felt something was off about him, but he never imagined the depths of the betrayal. He had to act fast. The club wasn't going to be able to face this kind of threat head-on without a plan. Jack turned to Diesel, who had been standing off to the side, watching the conversation unfold. Get the others. We need a strategy, Jack said. Diesel nodded and walked off to relay the orders. Jack's eyes lingered on the man he had just questioned. You're lucky I don't have time to deal with you, Jack said, his voice cold. The man stared up at him, fear evident in his eyes. You won't get away with this, he spat, but Jack didn't flinch. He wasn't here for a fight. He was here for answers, and he had them. As the rest of the club gathered around, Jack's mind was already racing ahead. They needed to get to Donovan before it was too late. He couldn't let the Serpents or the corrupt cops take another step toward destroying what little was left of the community. We ride out in 30, Jack said, his tone firm and resolute. This ends tonight. The Iron Riders geared up, their faces set in grim determination. They had fought gangs before, but this was different. They weren't just fighting for the safety of one person, they were fighting for the soul of the town itself. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon as the bikers revved their engines, their bikes roaring to life. The familiar sound of the engines filled the air, a signal to anyone who heard it that the Iron Riders were coming. Jack led the charge, his bike cutting through the growing darkness. He felt the weight of the mission ahead, but there was no turning back now. They were going to take down the Serpents, expose the corruption, and protect the people who had been left in the dark for far too long. As they neared the outskirts of the town, Jack's phone buzzed again. He pulled it from his pocket, his eyes scanning the message. It was from Vince. Donovan's at the courthouse. We need to move fast. Jack's grip tightened on the handlebars as he looked up ahead. The courthouse was just a few blocks away, and Donovan would be there, likely planning his next move. This was their chance. Jack glanced back at the crew behind him. We hit them hard and fast, he ordered. The group nodded in unison, their determination matching his own. They were getting closer, and the time for planning was over. This was the moment they had been preparing for. They arrived at the courthouse in a blur of chrome and leather, parking in the shadow of the building. Jack signaled for the others to stay back as he moved toward the entrance. He had to confront Donovan himself. The doors to the courthouse were locked, but Jack knew a way in. He approached the side entrance, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of trouble. The place was eerily quiet, but Jack had learned to trust his instincts. He pushed the door open, his boots making no sound on the polished floor. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Jack moved quickly, his eyes searching the dimly lit hallway. He could feel it now, the weight of everything that had been building up. Donovan wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was a man who had sold out everything he once stood for, and now he was about to face the consequences. Jack reached the office at the end of the hallway, the door slightly ajar. He could hear voices coming from inside, Donovan's voice among them. Jack pushed the door open slowly, his presence barely making a sound. Inside, Donovan was sitting at his desk, going over some paperwork. But when he saw Jack step into the room, his face drained of color. What are you doing here? Donovan asked, his voice shaky. Jack didn't answer. He stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Donovan's. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. This ends tonight, Jack said, his voice low and menacing. You're done. Donovan stood up quickly, trying to back away, but Jack was too fast. He grabbed the man by the collar and shoved him against the wall. You don't get to keep destroying lives, Jack spat. Not anymore. Donovan's eyes widened in fear. You don't know what you're doing, he stammered. You're making a huge mistake. Jack's grip tightened, and for a moment, it felt like the world had come to a stop. But Jack wasn't making a mistake. He was doing what needed to be done, for Rick, for Maya, and for everyone who had been hurt by the Serpents and the corruption in the town. Jack's grip tightened around Donovan's collar as the corrupt officer's eyes widened in terror. Jack could feel the weight of the moment settle in. He wasn't just fighting for his promise to Rick. He was fighting for something larger. The town, the people who had been manipulated and abused by the very systems that were supposed to protect them. Donovan had thought he could get away with everything, using his badge to shield him from consequences. But now, standing face to face with Jack, he realized he had underestimated the Iron Riders and the power of loyalty. "You're making a mistake," Donovan gasped, his voice trembling. "You don't know what you're dealing with. This goes higher than just me." Jack's eyes narrowed, his voice low and steady. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. I've seen it all before. Men like you, who think they're untouchable." He shoved Donovan against the wall harder, his patience wearing thin. "But this ends now." The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, followed by a loud knock at the door. Jack quickly released his hold on Donovan and stepped back, his body tensed in anticipation. He couldn't let anyone interfere now, not when they were so close. He motioned for Donovan to stay silent as he slowly approached the door. With one swift motion, Jack flung the door open, his hand hovering over his gun, ready for whatever threat awaited on the other side. Standing in the doorway was a man in a suit, looking completely out of place in the dimly lit courthouse. He was tall, his posture straight, and he had a calm demeanor that contrasted sharply with the intensity of the situation. Behind him, two officers stood at attention, their hands resting on their belts, watching Jack carefully. The man in the suit cleared his throat before speaking. "I'm Special Agent Thomas Price," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "And I believe you have something of mine." Jack studied him carefully, his mind working fast. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone cautious. Price smiled, but it was cold, calculated. "I think we both know what's going on here. You're trying to take down my operation, but you're stepping into something much bigger than you realize." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Operation?" he echoed. Price's smile widened. "You think it's just Donovan? You're naive. This is about more than just a few corrupt cops. It's about control, about power. The Serpents are just the beginning." Jack's jaw clenched as Price's words sank in. This wasn't just a small-town gang war. This was an intricate web of corruption that stretched beyond anything they had imagined. Price stepped further into the room, his eyes flicking over to Donovan, who was still slumped against the wall, clearly rattled. "You've already put yourself in a dangerous position, Jack. But don't worry, you'll get the chance to make things right," Price continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "All you have to do is back off. Walk away from this, and we'll forget about your little vigilante club. Keep pushing, and we'll make sure this becomes a lot more than you can handle." Jack didn't flinch. He had come too far to back down now. "You think I'm scared of you?" Jack growled, his hand resting on his gun, his eyes never leaving Price's. "You're wrong." Price raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Scared? No, you're not scared. But you should be." He motioned to the two officers behind him. "You've already made this personal. I'd hate for it to get any worse." Jack's mind raced as he considered his options. He wasn't just dealing with a corrupt cop anymore. He was facing an entire network, and he had to protect the people he cared about. Without breaking eye contact, Jack made his decision. "You've already crossed the line," Jack said firmly. "And now, you'll have to face the consequences." The two officers in the doorway tensed, but before they could react, Jack was already moving. In one fluid motion, he pulled his gun from the holster and pointed it at Price. The agents froze, their hands hovering near their weapons, but Jack didn't flinch. "You're not in charge here," Jack said, his voice steady and calm. "You're outnumbered." Price's confident facade cracked for a moment, his eyes flicking to the agents, but he quickly regained his composure. "You're making a huge mistake," he repeated, but Jack wasn't listening. Jack took another step forward, his gun still trained on Price. "The only mistake I made was thinking you were just another dirty cop," Jack said, his voice unwavering. "But now I see the whole picture." Price took a step back, his eyes calculating. He knew the game had changed. "You think this will end with you walking away?" Price sneered. "You'll never defeat us. We have the system. We have the power." Jack's grip on his gun tightened. He could feel the weight of the situation, the realization that this battle wasn't just about saving one family. It was about taking down a corrupt empire. I don't need to defeat you, Jack said, his voice calm and final. I just need to make sure you can't hurt anyone else. With that, Jack turned, signaling to the other bikers to move in. The Serpents had been just the tip of the iceberg. This wasn't over. And Jack wasn't going to stop until the truth came out. As the bikers flooded into the courthouse, Jack could feel the weight of the future pressing down on him. The real fight was just beginning. The Iron Riders stormed the courthouse, their boots pounding against the cold marble floor, the sound of their steps echoing in the dimly lit halls. Jack led the charge, his eyes scanning every corner as his crew followed close behind. The tension in the air was palpable, but Jack's focus remained unwavering. He could feel the weight of everything they were up against, the corrupt system, the Serpents, and now the police. He had promised Rick that he would protect his family, and tonight, that promise would be fulfilled. They reached the main courtroom, the doors wide open, and Jack could hear voices from within. The game was about to change. Stay alert, Jack muttered as he motioned for the bikers to spread out. He stepped forward, pushing the door open with a slow creak. Inside, a group of officials and officers stood near the bench, speaking in hushed tones. At the center of it all was Officer Donovan, his face pale and his hands shaking as he spoke with two men in suits. One of them was Special Agent Thomas Price, and the other was someone Jack didn't recognize, a tall man with a slick, dangerous look in his eyes. Jack's heart sank. This was the man who was pulling the strings. Price turned at the sound of the door opening, his eyes narrowing as he saw the bikers. What the hell do you want? Price snapped, his voice dripping with disdain. Jack didn't flinch. He stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on Price, the man who had been pulling the strings behind the corruption. We're here for justice, Jack said, his voice low and commanding. The room went silent as the officers and officials glanced around, clearly uncertain about what was happening. But Jack didn't wait for them to react. This ends now, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. The bikers spread out, surrounding the room with a calm, calculated menace. No one moved, no one dared to challenge them. Jack's eyes stayed locked on Price. He could see the fear flicker in the agent's eyes. You've crossed the line, Jack continued. You've manipulated the system, hurt innocent people, and thought you were untouchable. But not anymore. Price's lips curled into a sneer, his posture rigid. You have no idea what you're getting into, he said, trying to stand his ground. You think you can just waltz in here and take me down? Jack took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. You're not in control anymore, he said, his voice steady. We are. The tension in the room was thick, every eye fixed on Jack as he stood in front of Price. The other bikers stayed in their positions, ready to act at a moment's notice. Price's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. You don't know who you're dealing with, he spat, his voice rising. I've got connections. People who will protect me. Jack leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. Not anymore. Your network is broken, and the truth will come out. The door to the courtroom opened again, and a tall figure stepped inside. Vince, Jack's right-hand man. His eyes scanned the room, and he gave Jack a subtle nod. The bikers had the situation under control, but Jack knew it was time to make the final move. He turned back to Price, his eyes cold and unyielding. This is your last chance, Jack said. Walk away, and we'll let you go. Keep fighting, and you'll regret it. Price's eyes flickered between Jack and the bikers, but he didn't make a move. The realization was clear. He was trapped. Jack's gaze softened just a fraction. We don't want violence, he said, his voice softer now, though still firm. We want accountability. You've hurt too many people, and it's time to make it right. Price took a deep breath, his eyes darting around the room. He seemed to weigh his options, but he knew the game was over. With a sudden, sharp motion, Price pulled a gun from his jacket, his hand trembling. The room tensed, but before anyone could react, Jack was already on him. In a blur of motion, Jack's hand shot out, knocking the gun from Price's grasp and sending it skidding across the floor. He grabbed Price by the collar, lifting him off the ground. Not this time, Jack growled, his grip tightening. You've made your last move. The other bikers moved quickly, securing the remaining officers and officials, making sure they couldn't interfere. The room was filled with the hum of their motorcycles outside, a reminder that they were here to stay. Jack turned to the rest of the crew, his voice calm but resolute. Get them out of here, he said. We've done what we came for. Now it's time to take this to the streets. The bikers began to move, ushering the corrupt officials out of the courtroom and into the waiting bikes. Jack stood there for a moment, staring down at Price. You may have had power once, Jack said, his voice low, but you'll never have it again. With that, he turned and walked out of the courtroom, his men following behind him. The battle wasn't over, but they had won a critical victory. As they made their way back to their bikes, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They had taken down the corrupt officials, exposed the lies, and protected those who couldn't protect themselves. This was just the beginning, and Jack knew they were ready for whatever came next. The Iron Riders rode in silence, the streets of the small town stretching before them like a quiet, empty battlefield. The air was thick with the aftermath of the confrontation at the courthouse. Jack led the pack, his thoughts heavy with what had transpired. The victory was hollow, because he knew the fight was far from over. The Serpents had been dealt with, but the corruption that ran deep in the town's veins was still alive, still lurking. He had exposed one layer, but there were many more beneath the surface. As the bikes hummed steadily beneath them, Jack's eyes caught sight of the distant hills, the rising sun casting a dull glow over the horizon. It was the calm after the storm, but Jack knew better than to believe it would last. They had made an enemy of not just the Serpents, but of the entire system that protected them. It was only a matter of time before the retaliation came. The question was, how would they face it? We did good today, Vince's voice crackled through the radio, breaking the silence. Jack nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The rest of the riders had fought bravely, but they had all seen what Jack had seen, the deeper corruption. It wasn't just about taking down a gang anymore. It was about taking down the very people who had sworn to protect the town. Good is not enough, Jack replied, his voice steady, but full of determination. We've got to finish this, for good. The town was waking up as they rolled through the streets, and Jack could feel the eyes of the townspeople on them. Some watched with admiration, some with fear. The truth was out now, and they were left to deal with it. As they passed the familiar streets, the places they had once called home, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same. They weren't just bikers anymore. They were the last line of defense against a system that had failed them. The ride led them to a quiet part of town, where the buildings were older, the streets less traveled. Jack pulled up in front of a small diner, the Iron Riders following in a well-practiced formation. He cut the engine, the bikes falling silent, and for a moment, everything felt still. He climbed off his bike and walked toward the diner's entrance. The others followed, and as they stepped inside, the smell of fresh coffee and eggs filled the air. The diner was small, but it had always been their safe place, a quiet spot where they could regroup and make plans. The owner, a woman named Maggie, greeted them with a warm smile, though there was a hint of concern in her eyes. She had known the riders for years, and she knew better than anyone what they were up against. Morning, Jack, Maggie said as she set down a pot of coffee. How's it going? Jack hesitated, glancing around at his crew. The weight of everything that had happened, the threats that still loomed, pressed down on him. We've won some battles, he said quietly, but we're not done yet. Maggie nodded, as if she had expected that answer. She poured him a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. I figured as much, she said, her tone serious. But you're not alone in this. You've got more allies than you think. Jack looked up at her, his gaze steady. It's not enough, he said. We've exposed the Serpents, but the corruption goes deeper. The cops, the politicians, they've all been in on it. It's like they've been playing us all along. Maggie leaned forward, her hands resting on the counter. I know, she said softly. But that's why people like you need to keep pushing. You've already made a difference. People are talking, Jack. They're waking up. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He had always believed in the importance of family, of loyalty, but now he understood something deeper. It wasn't just about protecting the people close to him. It was about changing the system, even if it meant making enemies of the very people who were supposed to be protecting the town. The door opened behind them, and a man walked in, his face familiar to Jack. It was Rick, the father of the little girl they had saved. He walked straight toward Jack, a serious expression on his face. Jack, he said, his voice low but firm. I need to talk to you. Jack nodded and gestured for Rick to sit. What's going on? Rick glanced around at the bikers, then leaned in closer. "I've been hearing things," he said. "About the Serpents. About Donovan. It's not over, Jack. I know you've been fighting for my family, but there's more. There's someone else behind all this. Someone even more dangerous than the Serpents." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had known that the Serpents were only part of the problem. But this? It felt like the whole town was caught in the web of corruption, and now Rick was telling him that it went deeper. "Who?" Jack asked, his voice tense. Rick hesitated, his eyes darting around the diner before he spoke again. "It's not just one person," he said quietly. "It's a group. They're pulling the strings, and they've been doing it for years. They've got their hands in everything. Businesses, the police, even some of the judges. They've got the power, Jack, and they're not going to let you take them down." Jack sat back, processing Rick's words. He knew this fight wasn't just about the Serpents anymore. It was about taking on an entire system, one that had been operating in the shadows for far too long. "Then we take them down," Jack said, his voice steady. "One by one." The Iron Riders nodded in agreement, their faces hard with resolve. They had come this far, and they wouldn't stop now. The town had been taken over by corruption, but the Riders weren't going to let it fall any further. They had a mission, and they weren't backing down. The fight had just begun. The news hit the Iron Riders like a brick to the chest. The truth had finally come out, and now, with Rick's words ringing in their ears, they knew what they were really up against. The Serpents were just pawns in a much larger game, and their fight wasn't just about saving families anymore. It was about taking down an entire corrupt system. Jack stood in the diner, the weight of the mission ahead pressing heavily on his shoulders. As the bikers gathered around, the room was thick with silence, everyone digesting the revelation. The quiet hum of the diner seemed to heighten the sense of urgency. "We knew it was bad." Jack finally broke the silence. "But I didn't realize it went this deep." The riders exchanged looks, their resolve hardening with every word that Rick had said. "The Serpents are just the surface," Jack continued, his voice firm. "They're the muscle, but there's someone else pulling the strings. It's bigger than just us, but we're not backing down." The others nodded, their eyes burning with the same fire that had carried them this far. Diesel cracked his knuckles, the sound loud in the quiet diner. "So what's the next move?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Jack paused, taking a deep breath as he thought through their next steps. "We need to find out who's behind all this," Jack said. "The Serpents were easy enough to track, but this is different. We're dealing with people who have power, who know how to manipulate the system, and that's going to be our biggest challenge." "We'll find them," Bear growled, his voice thick with conviction. "We've got the numbers. We've got the bikes. And we've got each other." Jack nodded, appreciating the loyalty in Bear's words. The Riders had always been a family, but this fight was going to require more than just their typical street justice. This was about taking on a system, and that meant they needed to be smart. "We start by going after Donovan," Jack said, his tone decisive. "He's the key. He's the one who brought the Serpents into this mess, and if we can take him down, we'll have a shot at exposing everything else." Vince, always the strategist, spoke up next. "We need intel," he said. "We don't know who else is involved. If we make a move without knowing more, we're just going in blind. We need to dig deeper." Jack agreed. "You're right. We can't afford to make any mistakes. We're going to need eyes on Donovan, on everyone who's connected to him. We'll take this one step at a time." The bikers nodded, the plan taking shape in their minds. They all knew that it was going to take more than just brawn to win this battle. They needed to think strategically, to stay one step ahead of the people who had their hands in everything. "We've got to get to the heart of this," Jack said. "And that means we need to hit them where it hurts. Their money, their connections, everything that keeps them in power. We've got to cut them off at the source." The riders were fired up now, ready to take on whatever came next. They had faced danger before, but this was different. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about making sure that the people who had been pulling the strings for so long would finally pay for their crimes. "Let's get to work," Jack said, standing up and looking around at his crew. "We've got a town to save." As the riders filed out of the diner, their bikes roaring to life one by one, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into the storm of their lives. But he wasn't afraid. He had his family by his side, and together, they would take down anyone who stood in their way. The town had been asleep for too long. It was time to wake them up, to show them that there was still hope, still a chance to fight back. The Serpents had thought they had control, But they didn't realize that the Iron Riders were about to turn the tables. Jack revved his bike, the sound deafening as the crew rolled out, their spirits high and their hearts focused. They were heading into uncharted territory, but they were ready. They had to be. This was the fight of their lives. And they weren't about to back down. The Iron Riders moved swiftly through the back streets of the town, their engines roaring as they tore through the night. The sound of their bikes filled the air, a constant reminder of the storm they were about to unleash. Jack's mind raced as they approached the old warehouse on the outskirts of town. This was where it all began, the heart of the operation, where the Serpents had their dealings, and where they believed they were safe. But Jack knew better. They had no idea what was coming for them. "Stay tight," Jack ordered, his voice steady but laced with determination. The crew nodded, their eyes hard and focused, ready for the final confrontation. They had come too far to turn back now. As they neared the warehouse, the shadows loomed larger, and the air seemed to grow colder. The riders slowed their pace, each of them instinctively scanning the area for any signs of movement. The Serpents were likely holed up inside, preparing for whatever game they thought they were playing. But Jack wasn't interested in playing games. He was here to end this. The bikers dismounted, the sound of their boots hitting the ground echoing in the stillness of the night. Jack signaled for everyone to gather, keeping his voice low. "We're going in," he said. "We'll split into 2 teams. Vince, Bear, and Diesel, you take the front. The rest of you, follow me through the back." There was no time to waste. Every moment was precious. They couldn't afford to make a single mistake. Jack moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the dimly lit perimeter as they approached the back door of the warehouse. With a quick nod, he signaled for Diesel to kick it in. The door flew open, and the riders flooded in, their guns raised and their eyes sharp. Inside, the warehouse was eerily quiet, the faint hum of machinery the only sound. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and something more sinister. Jack moved cautiously through the shadows, his crew close behind. They knew the Serpents would be waiting for them, but they also knew the element of surprise was on their side. They had the advantage. The farther they moved into the warehouse, the more tense the atmosphere became. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound, seemed amplified in the silence. Jack's eyes darted around, looking for any sign of movement, any hint that they weren't alone. And then he saw it, a figure in the distance, standing motionless in the shadows. Jack's instincts kicked in, and he signaled for the team to spread out. As they took cover behind crates and machinery, the figure stepped forward, revealing himself to be none other than the leader of the Serpents, Marcus Viper. "You really think you can just walk in here and take us down?" Viper's voice was cold, mocking. He wasn't alone. Several of his men stepped out from the shadows, their faces grim, their hands resting on the grips of their weapons. Jack didn't flinch. "We're not here to negotiate," he said, his voice low and steady. "We're here to finish this." "Finish this?" Viper laughed, stepping closer. "You think you can stop me? You've got no idea who you're dealing with." Jack's eyes narrowed. He had been in enough battles to know when to fight and when to hold back. This wasn't about brute force. It was about strategy, about taking down the heart of the operation. And Viper, standing before him, was the last obstacle. "You've had control for too long," Jack said. "But that ends tonight." As Viper sneered, Jack made a subtle motion to Vince, signaling for him to flank the Serpents from the side. The rest of the riders moved into position, ready for whatever came next. Without warning, the Serpents opened fire, the sound of gunshots deafening in the enclosed space. The Iron Riders returned fire, the sharp crack of gunfire mixing with the roar of the bikes outside. It was chaos, but it was a controlled chaos. Jack moved with precision, his eyes locked on Viper. This was it, the final showdown. The 2 leaders faced off, their guns drawn, the tension between them thick. Viper's eyes burned with hatred, but Jack's gaze was cold, calculating. He had no fear. He had no doubt. "This is your last chance," Jack said, his voice unwavering. "Give it up. Leave town, and we'll let you go." Viper's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't get to tell me what to do," he spat. "You've already lost." Jack didn't respond. He fired first, his shot striking Viper's hand and sending the gun skittering across the floor. Viper let out a shout of pain, but before he could react, Jack was on him, closing the distance with lightning speed. In one swift motion, Jack knocked Viper to the ground, pinning him there. The serpents were scattered, many of them either down or retreating, but Jack's focus remained on Viper. "It's over," Jack said, his voice low and final. Viper's defiance faltered as he lay on the ground, his breath shallow. "You think you've won?" Viper hissed, his eyes filled with rage. "This is just the beginning." Jack shook his head, his grip tightening. "No, it's not," he said, his voice steady. "This ends tonight. You're done." With a final push, Jack disarmed Viper, signaling to the rest of the bikers to round up the remaining serpents. The mission had been a success. The serpents were finished. But Jack knew this was just the first step. The corruption that had plagued the town was far from over. But with Viper and his gang out of the picture, the riders had taken a massive step toward reclaiming their town. As the bikers gathered around, their faces determined, Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of what they had accomplished. They had fought for justice, for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. And they weren't about to stop now. The warehouse was a scene of quiet chaos as the last of the serpents were rounded up, their weapons discarded, their faces grim with defeat. Jack stood in the center of it all, his chest heaving from the adrenaline. But his eyes remained sharp, scanning the room. The battle was over, but the war wasn't. With Viper and his men subdued, the crew had won a significant victory. But Jack knew better than to believe it would be easy. As the bikers secured the warehouse, Jack moved toward the center, where Viper lay, bloodied but still defiant. The serpent leader's eyes locked onto his, a cold fury in them. "You think you've won, don't you?" Viper spat, his voice hoarse. "You're nothing but a small-time gang. You'll never take down what's really in control." Jack bent down, his face inches from Viper's. "I don't need to take it all down at once," he said calmly. "One piece at a time, and this town will be ours again. It's over for you." Viper let out a low laugh, blood dripping from his mouth. "You have no idea what you're up against," he muttered. Jack straightened up, signaling to Diesel. "Take care of him," he said. Diesel stepped forward, his broad form looming over Viper, and with one final look at Jack, he dragged the gang leader away. Jack turned his attention to the rest of the crew, who were now securing the warehouse's hidden rooms, finding documents, weapons, and enough evidence to take down the network that had been corrupting the town for years. The rest of the serpents were on the ground, cuffed and helpless, their faces showing the realization that their reign of terror was coming to an end. But Jack knew that the real fight was just beginning. The serpents had been the muscle, but now they had to face the people who had been controlling everything behind the scenes. They had exposed the first layer, but the deeper layers were waiting for them, more dangerous and more powerful than they could have imagined. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. The bikers had done their part, but it was time to take the fight to the source. "Vince, get the team together," Jack said, his voice steady. "We need to find out who else is involved. The corruption runs deep, and we're not stopping until we get it all." Vince nodded, already pulling out his phone to contact the others. Jack looked over at the other bikers. "We need to make sure no one gets away," he said. "And we need to keep our heads down. The last thing we need is for the cops to show up." As the bikers moved into action, Jack's mind raced. The serpents were just the first domino to fall, but there was so much more to do. He thought about Rick, about the promise he'd made to protect his family. He couldn't afford to fail now, not when they had come this far. The sun was beginning to rise as they finished cleaning up the warehouse. Jack climbed onto his bike, the roar of the engine filling the morning air. As he revved the throttle and led the pack out of the warehouse, his mind was already on the next step. The serpents had been a distraction. The real fight, the fight against the corrupt system that had enabled them, was about to begin. The riders had their work cut out for them, but Jack knew they were ready. They had faced down impossible odds before, and this was no different. The fight for the town, for the people who had been silenced for so long, was far from over. But as the bikers rode through the empty streets, Jack felt a surge of hope. The town was waking up, and they were going to make sure it stayed awake. The serpents would never control this town again. Jack didn't know exactly how it would all unfold, but one thing was certain. He and the Iron Riders would be at the forefront of it, fighting for justice, for the truth, and for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. As they rode on, the town still silent under the weight of the morning sun, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The real battle had just begun, and he was ready for whatever came next. The sun was fully up by the time the Iron Riders reached the outskirts of town, but Jack could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. The victory they had won the night before wasn't over. They had taken down the Serpents, exposed the corruption in the town, and removed the most dangerous players, but they still had no idea what lay ahead. He knew the battle was far from won. The real fight was with the unseen power, the people who had manipulated the entire town, the ones who hid in the shadows. Jack's mind raced as they rode through the streets, the town slowly coming to life around them. There were still people in the town who didn't know what had happened, who didn't realize the danger that still loomed. They had no idea how deep the rot had gone. But Jack wasn't concerned with those who didn't know. He was focused on the ones who did. His eyes scanned the streets, knowing full well that the Serpents weren't the only ones who had their hands in the dirt. It was time to put an end to the corruption once and for all. He led the riders to a small, secluded building in the center of town, an old, run-down office that looked like it hadn't been used in years. This was where it all started, where the real power in the town lay. As they parked their bikes and dismounted, Jack felt the same tension he had felt the night before. Only this time, there was no turning back. This was the last piece of the puzzle. "You ready for this?" Vince asked, walking up beside Jack. Vince had been with him through thick and thin. He was the closest thing to family that Jack had left. "Let's get this over with," Jack said, his voice calm, but the fire in his eyes was unmistakable. They walked up to the door and pushed it open, their boots echoing in the silence of the building. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the remnants of a place long abandoned. But Jack knew this was no coincidence. Someone had been here recently. The tension in the air was palpable as they moved deeper into the building, their eyes scanning every corner. They reached a small office in the back, the door slightly ajar. Jack motioned for the others to stay back as he stepped forward. Inside, there was a man sitting behind a desk, his back to them. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the figure. It was the same man who had been lurking in the background, the one who had been pulling the strings from the start. He had the same cold, calculating demeanor as the others they had fought before, but there was something different about him. "You must be Jack," the man said, his voice smooth and confident, without turning around. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Jack didn't say a word. He stepped forward, his boots silent on the floor, his eyes never leaving the man. The others moved in behind him, forming a tight circle around the office. "Who are you?" Jack asked, his voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. The man turned slowly, revealing his face. Jack could see the smug expression, the arrogance, and the hidden malice behind his eyes. This was the man who had been manipulating everything, the one who had been the puppet master from the shadows. "I'm the one who's been controlling everything, Jack," the man said, his lips curling into a smile. "You can call me Thomas Price." Jack's blood ran cold. Price, the same name that had come up in their investigation. The one behind the Serpents. The one who had orchestrated the corruption in the town. Jack stepped closer, his anger rising. "You're the one who's been behind all of this," Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're the one who's been pulling the strings." Price chuckled, clearly enjoying the power he held over the situation. "I've done what was necessary to maintain control, Jack," he said smoothly. "The Serpents were just a small part of the plan. I've been in this game for a long time, and I've always gotten what I wanted." Jack's grip tightened on his gun. "Not anymore," he growled. Price didn't seem fazed. "You think you can stop me? You think you can take down everything I've built?" he sneered. "You're just one man, Jack. And you're too late." Jack's heart raced, but he didn't show it. He stepped forward again, this time closer to Price, his eyes never leaving him. "I'm not alone," Jack said. "I've got my brothers by my side. And you're going down." Price's face twisted in frustration. "You can't do this. You have no idea who you're up against," he spat. "I control everything here. The police, the businesses, the politicians. You can't touch me." Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I don't need to touch you," he said. "I just need to expose you." With a quick motion, Jack pulled his gun from its holster, pointing it directly at Price. The other bikers raised their weapons, ready for whatever came next. Price looked at the gun, then back at Jack, his eyes widening slightly. "You don't want to do this," Price said, his voice shaking slightly now. "You don't know what you're messing with." Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger once, the sound of the gunshot deafening in the small room. Price's chair tipped backward as he fell to the floor, his eyes wide with shock. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. Jack stood there, looking at the man who had caused so much pain, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of relief. The fight wasn't over, but this was a major victory. Jack turned to the others. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice steady. "We've got a town to rebuild." The bikers moved swiftly, leaving the building and heading back to their bikes. Jack felt the weight of the moment, but he knew this was just the beginning. They had won a small victory today, but the war was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like they had a chance. And he wasn't going to let it slip away. The streets of the town felt different now, quieter, almost like the calm before the storm. The Iron Riders had dealt the final blow to the Serpents, and the network of corruption was unraveling. But Jack knew the hardest part was yet to come. He had made it this far, kept his promise to Rick, but now the question loomed. What came next? He stood in front of the diner, the familiar smell of coffee and bacon in the air, but it felt like a different place now, a place that would never be the same. He looked over at his brothers, each of them dealing with their own thoughts, their own emotions after the fight. The victory felt bitter. They had rid the town of one dangerous gang, but they had uncovered something much bigger, a network that stretched far beyond their reach. "We've done what we set out to do," Vince said, breaking the silence as he walked up beside Jack. "But there's more, isn't there?" Jack nodded slowly. "We've exposed the Serpents, but the real fight is with the system. The people who let them operate for so long. We've got to take them down, too." Vince sighed, his eyes reflecting the same fatigue that Jack felt. "The town's not going to change overnight," he said quietly. "We've still got work to do." Jack glanced at the rest of the bikers. They had been his family for years, and they had stood by him through everything. But now, the fight wasn't just about protecting their own. It was about saving the town. It was about making sure no one else fell victim to the same corruption. "We're not stopping now," Jack said, his voice firm. "This town is ours, and we're going to make sure it stays that way. We take the fight to the ones who have been controlling everything behind the scenes. We find out who's really in charge, and we bring them down." The others nodded in agreement. There was no turning back now. They had made it this far, and they weren't going to stop until the town was safe. As they all climbed onto their bikes, the sound of the engines filled the air, a powerful reminder that they were ready for whatever came next. The fight against the Serpents had been just the beginning. The real battle was against the ones who thought they were untouchable, the ones who controlled everything from the shadows. But the Iron Riders weren't afraid. They had faced down bigger threats, and they had always come out on top. "Where do we go from here?" Diesel asked, his voice low but full of determination. Jack revved his engine, feeling the vibrations deep in his chest. "We go wherever the fight takes us," he said, his voice resolute. "We take the fight to them, and we make sure they know we're coming." With that, the Iron Riders sped off into the distance, the roar of their engines cutting through the air like a battle cry. Jack's mind raced as they rode. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this town fall back into the hands of the corrupt. They had a chance now, a chance to take control, and he wasn't going to waste it. The road ahead was long, but Jack knew they were ready. They had come together as a family, fought side by side, and now they were going to fight for the town that had always been their home. The Serpents were done, but the real work was just beginning. They would face the power that had been hiding behind closed doors, and they would make sure it was brought to light. For the town, for Rick, for everyone who had been hurt. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. And Jack and the Iron Riders would see it through to the end.